But now we face the second big question, which is, okay, you have this thing that you want to build. Maybe you just build a new product and you call it Tobi's brilliant autonomous marketing decisioning agent. Now, no, as you can tell, I'm not a product marketer, obviously, because hopefully nobody calls it that. But you build this product and you go to a dark room and you bring all the smart people, hire the PhDs, and you gravitate towards building this thing and writing the Bayesian reinforcement learning models on the whiteboard. You feel really good about yourself. Nobody wanted what we built. So I've really reworked the way that I'm thinking about tackling these big problems. My name is Tobi Konitzer. I am VP of AI for Growthloop.
This is Code Story, a podcast bringing you interviews with tech visionaries.
I think 6 months moonlighting.
There's nothing on the back end.
Who share what it takes to change an industry.
I don't exactly know what to do next.
Took many goes to get right.
Who built the teams that have their back.
A company is its people.
The teams help each other achieve
I was
more.
proud of our team.
Keeping scalability top of mind.
All that infrastructure was
Yes, we've been fighting it as we grow.
Total waste of time. The stories you don't read in the headlines.
It's not an easy thing to achieve, mind
Took it
you.
off the shelf and dusted it off and tried it again.
To ride the ups and downs of the startup life.
You need to really want it. Not just about technology.
All this and more on Code Story. I'm your host, Noah Labhart, and today how Tobi Konitzer is driving compound growth by introducing customer data and agentic intelligence. Today's episode is brought to you by .tech Domains, and this one hits close to home. Back in 2016, I was building my startup and went hunting for that perfect .com and found next to nothing. So I did what every founder does, settled. Here's what I wish someone had told me. You're building a tech startup, just get a .tech domain. It instantly tells investors and customers what you're about. Don't overthink it. Secure your .tech domain today from any registrar of your choice. This episode is sponsored by Unblocked. Unblocked is the context layer your agents are missing. It synthesizes your PRs, docs, Slack, and tickets into organizational context that agents actually understand. So they make better plans, write higher quality code, use fewer tokens, and require fewer correction loops. If you're running Claude Code, Cursor, or any agentic workflow, Unblocked is worth a look. Learn more at getunblocked.com/codestory. This episode is sponsored by Mesmo. If your team is collecting large volumes of logs, metrics, and traces, but still struggling to get timely answers, Mesmo can help. Mesmo is an active telemetry platform that processes and enriches observability data in real time before it's stored or analyzed. That means lower data volume, lower cost, and faster root cause analysis across your existing observability tools. To see how it works, get a demo at mesmo.com/codestory. That's MEZMO.com/codestory. This episode is sponsored by BrainGrid. If you are building with AI coding tools, but your features keep breaking, you need to check out BrainGrid. It is the product management agent for AI builders. BrainGrid turns messy ideas into clear specs, tasks, and prompts that coding agents like Cursor and Claude can actually build the right way. Ship real software, not fragile prototypes. Start free at braingrid.ai. Tobi Konitzer was born in Germany and studied cultural studies as an undergraduate student. Eventually, he went to Duke to get a PhD in political science, and that eventually changed to become a PhD in computational social science at Stanford, which is basically writing code to answer social science questions. After graduating in 2017, he joined Facebook Research for a year, then founded 2 AI startups. But outside of tech, he has 2 young daughters who he likes to spend time with and take to the park. He used to be an avid trail runner, but his favorite thing to do is think, and do so as often as possible. For the last 10 years of his career, Tobi has been chasing optimized decisioning and outcomes using AI. 5 months ago, he decided to join his current venture and use AI to shift the conversation from tooling for marketers to using AI to build an autonomous decisioning system that learns and improves over time. This is Tobi's creation story at Growthloop.
So Growthloop, before I joined and still, is what is called a composable customer data platform. So essentially what that means in the marketing world, without having to pull any data out, so zero copy data, customers can use Growthloop, which unifies data automatically on the customer data warehouse and then serves two marketing applications on top of that. One is audience building. The other one is journey canvas or journey building. So imagine you're a marketing person and you say, look, I want to build an audience of people that have a very high transaction volume and they open my last email. Usually that data is siloed. The email engagement data lives over here and the transaction data lives over there. And so the workflow would be you ask your data engineer to pull that data for you, to unify it, and write the SQL code to build the audience. Essentially what Growthloop does is provide a UI that does not require any of these, as one of my colleagues would say, these bread lines. You as a marketer having to wait for the data engineer to satisfy the ticket, right? You can, through the UI, build these audiences directly, and it automatically merges these tables together from different parts of your data warehouse, and then also exports the audience to a destination. Like Braze, like Iterable, like Facebook, like Google Ads. So that is a traditional world of composable CDP. Essentially, if you think about it, that's tooling for the marketer, right? It's tools to make your job more efficient. And the whole gain here is efficiency. When I started talking to Tobi, as our CTO, CPO, and Chris O'Neill, as our CEO, these guys had laid out a vision of closing the loop. So essentially of using AI to build almost like an autonomous decisioning system that doesn't ask the marketer to build the journey, but actually builds the journey in such a way that the ROI is maximized, right? And shift the whole debate from tooling for the marketer to an opinionated, outcomes-optimized decisioning network that maximizes whatever return to pre-specify. And I have to tell you, these sort of closing the loop plans are not only ambitious, but I've been chasing them for the last 10 years of my career, both in AdTech and in MarTech. And that's why I signed on. We can talk a little bit about where Growthloop is now, what we're building towards, how we bring this vision to life. I'll stop here for a second.
Well, that's actually a perfect segue. That's kind of the next place I want to go. So what is being built now? What is the next step with Growthloop now that you've joined and you're going to tackle these ambitious problems?
It's an interesting problem because most companies have this problem. Oh, let me infuse AI into existing products or somehow into our offering and make our offering strong. I think Growthloop was a little bit ahead of that before I joined because there was a specific vision about the compounding marketing engine. Also, this autonomous, self-optimizing thing, breathing organism that automatically maximizes the outcome. But in general, I think it's a hard question to answer. And if you look at most companies out there, particularly with the emergence of generative AI, one of the ways, or very early things that many companies build is something like a chatbot. Because it's so obvious, right? You can build a chatbot that is powered by Gen AI. And I scoff at that a little bit. Why? Because for most companies, it's actually completely orthogonal to the product offering, right? So I'm a car marketplace. And my first investment in AI is to build something that is entirely orthogonal for my product. So that's not the mistake that we wanted to repeat here. But now we face the second big question, which is, okay, you have this thing that you want to build. Maybe you just build a new product and you call it Tobi's brilliant autonomous marketing decisioning agent. Now, no, as you can tell, I'm not a product marketer, obviously, because hopefully nobody calls it that. But you build this product and you go to a dark room and you bring all the smart people, hire the PhDs, not just me, but hire more PhDs. And you gravitate towards building this thing and writing I'm going to use one mathematical term, writing the Bayesian reinforcement learning models on the whiteboard. You feel really good about yourself, right? And I've been there in my career, by the way. My last venture raised about $6 million, hired all the smart people, built the product in a vacuum. And then we of course, we're smart people, so we knew that the market wanted exactly what we had built, right? No, nobody wanted what we built. So I've really reworked the way that I'm thinking about tackling these big problems, how to infuse AI into product, right? So what we did is we looked very carefully where is product usage? Which are the product elements today that are used? And how can we basically upgrade these properties, these primitives, one by one with elements towards that vision, such that we basically battle test all the components? Think about it as a car. You want to build this luxury car, instead of building it in a vacuum, you build the components. You infuse the existing primitives that have a guaranteed and known usage with these primitives or with these elements towards the vision that you build. You get customer feedback, and by the time all these components are validated, then maybe you put it all into the big, beautiful Ferrari that is waiting there, the hull, the shell, and then you go. So it's a very different way to think about infusing AI into product and building new AI product. And now, of course, the big question is, can you go top down in terms of your thinking and prioritization? And can you take such a vision as this compounding marketing engine, this autonomous outcomes optimized decisioning system, and break it down into components that are small enough that make sense to infuse into existing products, and to also ensure that you get usage out of these so you can iterate over them, you can make them better. And I think that's, probably the biggest challenge in this undertaking.
I'm curious, where you started, right? What would you call your quote unquote MVP? Maybe not the company MVP, but your MVP when you joined. Like, where did you start with this new way of thinking, and what sort of tools were you using to bring it to life?
So here, I probably spent a month to try to turn this vision into a sequential order of elements that can be built and infused with the existing products, most notably audiences and journeys. And I can walk you through this process. This process is still higher level, but essentially taking the vision, which we haven't quite talked about yet, but taking the vision and then saying, okay, what is naturally the first step? And it turned out that the first step was building experimentation, infusing capabilities into particularly audiences, which is our most used product, that pulls experimentation back from the downstream systems, right? Positions Growthloop as a central hub of experimentation intelligence, so I can log that data. And I can understand causal relationships and the causal effect of different interventions. So that to me was the foundation. I cannot build an autonomous decision system or decisioning system if I don't give the system a prior as to, here's a track record of encoded causal relationships or causal statements and the results. So for that to happen, I needed experimentation. I actually needed experimentation to sit in the product primitive that our customers use the most. Now you have a different problem, which is you got to go to the market and you got to convince the market that you better use my experimentation service as opposed to the experimentation service that lives downstream. So in the customer engagement platforms, in the marketing clouds. And so we had to build features into the experimentation platform to make sure that this pull happens, that we can be the gravity of intelligence for experimentation. And that was two features. One of them was, we sit on top of all your data so we can forecast exactly how can you run the most efficient experiment. So our argument all of a sudden was, okay, you run experimentation in your marketing cloud and you usually say, you know what, I'm going to dedicate 50% of the traffic to the control group and 50% to the treatment group. All right? That's all you can do. But imagine if you move experimentation closer to the data where we sit, right, where you have much more intelligence. Now, we can use machine learning or AI to forecast how to run the experiment most efficiently. So imagine if there is a 10% gain in the experiment, right? You're paying real money with this 50-50 split because you're withholding the good treatment that you know is going to lift the damn thing by 10%. You're withholding that from 50% of your people in perpetuity. So how can you get away with a split that still gets you to stat sig while also maximizing the ROI from the experiment? Maybe it's a 10-90 split. Maybe it's a 991 split. But in order to do that forecasting, you need to see all the data. Guess what? We're the only player that sees all the data. That was one pull. The other pull is what we call always-on measurement, which is the marketing conundrum. It's related but different. Right? So you run an experiment, you observe the winner, right? One condition is clearly winning on the metric that you care about. Scale it up, right? Bam, 100% of the traffic to this thing. Okay, but now you can't measure ROI anymore. So now your new boss comes in 2 years later and says, you know what, Noah, you've done this thing 2 years ago. You told everybody, I found your PowerPoint slides, right? You said there was a 20% causal lift, 10% increase in LTV. Very impressive. How much revenue did we make because of that in the last quarter? What are you going to say? You don't know. Said, oh, we scaled the experiment. There's nothing else to be done. What if you could still measure the returns of any experimental design that you ever did in the company, even if they're scaled up to 100%? That is our concept of always-on measurement, and I think it's quite a unique concept. But you get the idea. So there is a list of sequential components. They require some buy-in from the customer. So when you build these components, you better develop value proposition back to the customer that actually entices them to do what I ask you to do, which is not easy, right? I ask you to do, damn it, stop experimentation on all the downstream platforms. Don't do it. We're going to offer you an experimentation service, which is better. I better have good arguments for what better is. And that's how we think about building the product.
Today's episode is brought to you by .tech domains. And this one hits close to home. Back in 2016, when I was building my own tech startup, I went on the hunt for that elusive.com. Looked high, looked low, and guess what I found? Nothing. What I did find cost me an arm and a leg. So I did what every founder does under pressure. Threw in extra letters, settled for the less than optimal name. And here's what I wish someone had said to me back then. Noah, you're building a tech startup. Just get a .tech domain. Tech startup, .tech domain. It could not be more obvious. It tells investors, customers, and anyone who looks at your website, really, that tech is at the core of your build. And I've kicked myself plenty since, especially when I see the clean and sharp names tech companies have landed on .tech. Nothing.tech, 1x.tech, Aurora.tech, CES.tech, Ultra.tech, Alice.tech, Neon.tech, Blaze.tech, Pi.tech. You get the idea. So take it from someone who learned it the hard way. If you're building a tech startup, don't overthink it. Secure your .tech domain today from any registrar of your choice. This episode is sponsored by BrainGrid. Building with AI coding tools is exciting until the moment things start breaking. You ask for a small change and suddenly 3 other features stop working. AI gets confused, misses edge cases, and loses track of your intent. The problem is not code generation. The problem is planning. That is why BrainGrid exists. BrainGrid acts as your product management agent. It writes clear specification, maps UX flows, asks the clarifying questions you forgot to ask, and breaks big ideas into engineering-grade tasks that AI coding tools can build reliably. It guides Cursor, Claude Code, Replit, Windsurf, and others so they deliver features that work and keep working. Founders use BrainGrid to build real AI-native SaaS products without a technical background. If you want reliable features instead of fragile prototypes, try BrainGrid for free at braingrid.ai. That's braingrid.ai. So then, how do you go about figuring out what to do next, right? You figured out those 2 really important components, and it makes sense to me how you're explaining that. How did you, to wrap it in a box a little bit, how do you come up with your roadmap? What sort of criteria do you decide, or who do you talk to, or how do you go about putting together that, okay, this is the next most important thing to build? And I assume that it flows really nicely from what you just said.
It's a top-down process. So we came with a vision first. In the vision, I probably should spend a couple of more sentences describing the vision. I've talked a lot now about this autonomous system, but basically the vision was that ultimately we let the agent decide what marketing treatments we will consider in your quest for optimization, right? So we ask you, what's your goal? Okay, your goal is maximizing LTV. Like any other lifecycle marketer, there's only one goal. I can already tell you that. Every lifecycle marketer, head of CRM, is paid for exactly that. Right? How can you maximize the squeeze once you have a customer in your CRM? There's nothing else to do. It's the only goal. Using agentic AI to define the universe of treatments and then using decisioning to essentially, or one-to-one personalization and decisioning, to essentially allocate the traffic or allocate each user to the marketing treatment that will maximize his or her returns. So that was the vision. Now, how do we validate that vision? One, it's my vision, so I really like it. Second, you have a lot of conversations and make sure that you are aligned as to where that market goes. And that's really freaking difficult. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear, so I'll say freaking difficult. Why is that so difficult? Because, look, I've been a founder before for the last 7 years before doing this. You cannot build the product without the customer. That's true. But also, if you just do everything the customer tells you, you're not a product company. You live under the dictate of the status quo and you can't grow. That's a conundrum of companies. That's a conundrum of product building. There is a latitude there. You got to have some conviction. You got to have some pull from the market. You got to bring it to them. We did our best to verify that this vision is the right mix of both of these extremes. We talked about agentic AI building the universe of treatments at your disposal at any given time. If I do that, I need what we call causality data. So I need to tell the agent, you know what? Here is a large history of causal relationships, or here is a large history, a large data set of encoded causal statements that you can learn from how to initialize. So that comes first. That has to come first, just a sequential order. And then from there, once you have that, you build this into an agentic context graph. And that includes a lot of machine learning. You got to basically imagine that. You have an audience that is exported to a target destination. It gets exposed to ad content. I got to pull that ad content back and use the LLM or the agentic infrastructure to embed it, to store it, to log it. Okay, so that comes next. And then obviously the last part is once I have the LLM that initializes or specifies the universe of possible treatment options, then I need a smart decisioning engine that allocates the traffic to each of these options such that returns are maximized. So basically, once you are in alignment in terms of the high-level vision, then it's easier to do a sequential list of things that naturally have to come after one another, and then you have a product roadmap. I will also say just operationally, what I did is I wrote an AI 6090-180. This is not a surprise. Every VP does this, and shipped it to sales, to partnership, to CTO, to CEO, and basically forced folks to admit or to agree that we're on the same page. So we have that on the record. And that's one thing that I learned. I think it's important to have that buy-in, right? If you do that vision and sales has very different perspectives, you're in trouble, right? Because think about it. Now that we're building this thing, it requires a large amount of discipline because we're building components one after another stoically. If that starts to be outside what is desired and outside what drives revenue, you're in trouble very quickly as a company.
Let's talk about team. To do something like this, you got to have the right people. Obviously, you're one of those right people, but how do you grow your team and how do you build your team? What do you look for in those people to indicate that they're the winning horses to join you?
The number one thing that I'll say is do not work with recruiters. That to me, I've learned this the hard way. Look, what we're building is highly specialized. Recruiters can work for entry-level positions, they can work for commoditized positions, but not for what I'm building. How do you do it? There is something that cannot be avoided, which is painful community building. I looked at on decisioning science. Basically, that is a fancy word for reinforcement learning, Bayesian, multi-armed bandits, things like that. Where does the community live? Lives in Europe. Those are companies like Expedia. They're companies like Zalando, the German multi-billion-dollar marketplace, right? They've built these systems at scale. So you start an AI decisioning working group or reading group, and you beg these people to show up that have the right background. And at some point they show up and you observe how they behave in these reading groups. Do they get the cross pressures of revenue and product building, which we have to face as a still a fairly early stage startup? Can they build product under pressure? Are they purists that are PhDs that just want to prove they're right, or they're practical? And then you go from there. And then as last, I can give you 2 other pieces of practical advice that's probably going to get cut. But I don't hire from business schools, 1. And then 2, my preference is to hire PhDs. Why? Because I tackle product problems the way I used to tackle research problems. So I'm very familiar with that thinking. But here's the crux. There is nothing that replaces 2 or 3 years of industry experience. If you don't have that, I think it's a very risky hire. I've done these hires before when I was really cash constrained. There's just a much higher risk factor to it, right? Here I didn't. So the people that we brought have industry experience because I had the flexibility to do. But that gives you a little bit of an idea. If you build something as specialized, that in my opinion is, I don't want to be presumptuous, but you know what? Probably the only way to build a team and make sure that the folks you bring in are successful.
This episode is sponsored by Mesmo. If you're responsible for reliability, performance, or platform architecture, you already know the problem. Telemetry volume is growing faster than teams can manage it. Mesmo addresses this by moving observability upstream. Instead of storing everything and asking questions later, Mesmo processes telemetry in motion. filtering, transforming, and enriching logs, metrics, and traces before they reach your observability backend. The result is cleaner data, reduced ingestion costs, and faster root cause analysis using the tools you already rely on. Mesmo integrates with platforms like Datadog, Dynatrace, and open source stacks, giving teams more control without adding operational overhead. This is especially useful for platform engineers and SREs supporting complex distributed systems where context and speed matter. To see how active telemetry works in practice, get a demo at mesmo.com/codestory. That's MEZMO.com/codestory. This episode is sponsored by Unblocked. Your coding agents have access to your code base. Maybe you even connected other tools via MCPs. But access doesn't mean context. Agents can't reason across MCPs. They don't know your architectural decisions, your team's patterns, or why the API was shaped the way it is. So agents look in the wrong place and deliver bad outputs. Then you spend time correcting. More loops, more tokens. Unblocked is the context layer your agents are missing. It synthesizes your PRs, docs, Slack, and tickets into organizational context that agents actually understand. So they make better plans, write higher quality code, use fewer tokens, and require fewer correction loops. If you're running Claude Code, Cursor, or any agentic workflow, Unblocked is worth a look. Learn more at getunblocked.com/codestory. I'm curious about scalability. This will be interesting, right? Where scale was considered in the beginning. Obviously, there's going to be some elements that are part of your bread and butter, but I'm also curious about where you've had to fight scale as you've grown. And that could be people, it could be technology. I'm primarily interested in the technology aspect.
One thing that I've found is very rarely do you tackle problems that are really not scalable from a technology perspective. I'll give you a concrete example of that, by the way. My first company, the backend code was written in a coding language called R, and it used an MCMC's, a Monte Carlo processor that was called Stan. It was a C++ wrapper. So that thing fantastically didn't scale. It was meant for a sample size of 100 people. We tried to apply it to sample size of millions, and that was a hard constraint. And what we did back then is we somehow managed to get this thing to the graphical processing unit when these guys came up on AWS and made it scale. That was probably the wrong way to do that because it burned a lot of resources. I was way too stubborn to let go of this beautiful purist Bayesian implementation. And even then, there was a way things scaled. So I think it's very rare that you face hard constraints where technology really doesn't scale. There's obviously exceptions to the rule. If you're trying to do something in session or your latency is something like 30 milliseconds and you build complex APIs, there scale is important, but usually it can be solved one way or another. What cannot be solved so easily is scale when it comes to people. And my conviction is this, I don't want to say what I said elsewhere, customers are smart, and sometimes you got to force customers a little bit to their own luck, right? So when you build something like experimentation, I always will bias towards defaulting new releases to on. You can still turn it off if you have a validated vision that has a lot of ingredients. I take a more radical approach where I don't do that motion of going to every customer and trying to convince that customer that it's the right thing and then hoping for the opt-in. It's a quick switch in the UI where you default to on. Makes it a little bit harder if you really don't want to do experimentation on the platform. It makes it a little bit harder, but it's not prohibitive. But what you get is this inadvertent usage, and that goes towards sometimes showing the customer the way a little bit. Again, if you do too much of that, you're in trouble, right? That's the beginning of the statement. You cannot build product without the customer buy-in. That doesn't work. But again, if you flip that statement around completely, it doesn't work either. So there is some tricks to deal with people management, which I certainly have come to understand to be the much harder element of scale.
I'm curious, Tobi, as you step out on the balcony, you look across all that you've built thus far at Growthloop, what are you most proud of?
What I'm definitely proud of is taking that ambitious vision and distilling it into a product roadmap that it's scantable, it's ticketable. So I think that translation we have done, and that's one thing that I said early on too, is on the product side, what we're building is ambitious, but I think it can be done. And I certainly think it can be done by me, but there's other smart people, and I'm not even sure if I'm smart. product marketing is hard, and that relates to change management. I think we've started to set a good cadence and a good foundation of getting marketers to rethink some of the big topics that we need them to rethink. The biggest one, and we touch on that, is that correlative decision-making does not get you anywhere. So basically, if you ask the LM, hey, look at all my data, and Susie is a new customer, just design the intervention that maximizes her returns, right? It'll do so based on correlational thinking. It'll crunch all the data that got you to the status quo, and then it'll apply that to Susie with unknown effects, right? We need marketers to think causally, counterfactually, right? To think, okay, it doesn't matter that I have all this correlational data. Really, what I need to know is what is the effect of X on Susie, meaning what is the outcome for her with seeing this ad, and what is the outcome for her without seeing this ad. This, call it the fundamental problem of causal inference, because it's not observable. You can't clone Susie and give her both at the same time. But at least there is answers that get you closer to that reality, and decisioning is one of them. If we get marketers to understand that reality, we're one step further along our continuum. And I think we've done a good job both laying the foundations in terms of content, but also now cadence of how we speak about it in the market and how we're heard by the buyer.
Let's flip the script a little bit. Tell me about a mistake you made and how you and your team responded to it.
First of all, Noah, I made plenty of mistakes and continue to make plenty of mistakes. And I'm not even sure. I used to think that the only thing that you can do is learn from mistakes. But I think, unfortunately, our capability to learn as humans is quite low. So I'm not even sure if that's too ambitious of a statement for me even. But that's just the intro. I've made plenty of mistakes. I think what I really learned the hard way is that using machine learning to build predictive models does not do anything. It does not win anybody over. It does not change outcomes. And I think ultimately marketers will pick up on that. So example being here, my second venture was a company that used machine learning to predict customer lifetime value. It's cool. It used much more data, better algorithms, a framework that we call Buy Until You Die, which is a little bit of an inside joke because the modeling framework up to this point was called Buy Until You Die, and we brought it to PyTorch. Anyways, imagine you had a magic wand and you could predict the revenue future of every customer. Cool, right? And the company grew because we could predict the accuracy of these predictions, or we could prove the accuracy of these predictions. But what do you do with descriptive ML? How do you turn that into revenue growth, right? And it was a very hard question to answer. This is all about closing the loop, right? If you know this future, remember, this is the future based on your status quo. The whole idea of marketing is you want to do something different for customers. You want to change something, otherwise you don't need to be there. And it turned out that sort of translating these predictive scores or predictive models into this outcomes-based thinking was really, really hard. I lost the company over that because I saw that too late. We cracked it at Occur, by the way. We cracked it by piping these predictions back into the ad auctions, the ad bidding systems on Google Ads. And you can see that was the only way to turn this descriptive machine learning model into an end-to-end pipeline that generated measurable returns. But so one thing I've learned the hard way is don't put too much stock into accuracy of machine learning. It's the wrong question to ask. The right question to ask is, how much business impact does technology or AI generate? And how easily is it provable? And how early is it provable?
Tobi, you've touched on this a bit, but I kind of want to give space for a full answer and some things that you see in where you're going as Growthloop, but also where the industry is going and all the things. I'm curious about the future. What does the future look like for Growthloop, for what you're building, for your team, for the industry, all the things?
Future for the industry certainly will look like machines making more and more decisions. And by the way, I think that's a good thing. Machines making more and more decisions of traditional marketing workflows or the traditional job to be done that marketers right now own. And that's, by the way, that's not unique to marketing. You'll see the same in diagnosis. You see the same in sentencing. It's one of my favorite examples. And you can see that it's not a bad thing. Sentencing, if you think about human decisioning in sentencing, sentencing is arbitrary. You can't audit the human. There is a lot of bias in there. There is a lot of noise in there. Hiring, think about hiring. You had a bad breakfast. You don't hire the guy, but the guy was fantastic. It's not even you're biased against the person. It's just noise, which is probably the bigger source of human error, actually. In general, I think that's a very good thing. I think the big question is, how do machines take over decisioning? And what we certainly believe will be here for the foreseeable future is a hybrid system where you have manual elements or you have human in the loops, where let's say the machine comes up with 10 different variations of content. You, as a human in the loop, validate that content. You iterate over that content. Then the machine makes the decisioning and basically decides for any individual what content gets served up when he or she comes to that point in the journey. Yeah, you let the machine do that decision, but the human can audit that decision alongside quantitative parameters. And we can talk exactly about what that is. Visualize that decision. Okay, that I think is the future for the foreseeable. That is the reality for the foreseeable future. This is where we're going. So it doesn't replace the human. It puts more onus on the decisioning side to the AI, but at least the way we build it, it ensures that there is a human in the loop. Now, go 3 years forward. The big question to me that I've been thinking about a lot, is there any human in the loop anymore when it comes to decisioning? And I'll give you a very specific example. Right now, agentic AI is, and we talked about that, but it's terrible at initializing, meaning you have this whole thing and you say, oh, I want to maximize LTV. Now, build me 10 different pieces of content that are close to the maximum and I can do decisioning over. LLMs suck at that, right? Agentic AI cannot do that because it doesn't have that data. We are collecting that data. We can train specific agentic AI on the back of this agentic context graph that can do that better. But now, 3 years later, maybe we have the emergence of agentic commerce. I don't think that's going to come, by the way, quite to the extent. But let me define agentic commerce. Agentic commerce is essentially agent or agentic AI being present in the whole checkout process, right? So it's you as a human, or maybe you as another agent, that'd be zero-to-zero commerce, talking to an agent and essentially the agent understanding and dictating and governing the entire checkout process. At that point, you could argue that the agent collects so much data on causal relationships that right now it does not have, that it can take over the whole decisioning process. I still am skeptical whether that's going to come for two reasons. One reason is, think about this quantitative auditability. Or if we want to phrase a coin, I need to write about this, but something like radical quantitative auditability. That does not work with LLMs. You can ask LLMs, hey, why did you make the decision? Why did you serve this ad to Susie? And the agent can give you a textual response, but it cannot really give you a quantitative response, not at least in the way that these traditional systems can. And then the other thing I would say is replicability. These systems are not replicable. Why? Because, first of all, models change all the time. Foundational models evolve all the time. But the data on which they're trained changes all the time, too. So basically, if Susie comes back 10 minutes later, the agent makes a different decision as to what content it would have served her. And I don't think that's what marketing wants. I think marketing desires more transparency. And just to be sure, where we are going is this first world, right? A lot of the decisioning turned over to the AI, but the human clearly in the loop, and the systems being transparent and the systems being auditable alongside cleanly defined numerical parameters. Now, I think that is a question, by the way, for all fields. Will there ever be a future where there is no human in the loop, described in the letter statement? I think for most fields, that would be a disaster. There's exceptions. Text to code, I don't think anybody complains if the agents become very autonomous. But I think for most fields, including marketing, including sentencing, including diagnostics in the medical space, would fall to disaster if there was such a version of autonomous agentic AI without human in the loop. And it's not what we're building towards.
Okay, Tobi, let's switch to you individually. Who influences the way that you work? Name a person or many persons or something you look up to and why.
I'll name two people. My kids always, and my daughters, my girls always influence the way I work, mostly in the sense that I work so I can spend most of my time with them. But that aside, there is certainly, I think, big influences in the way that I think about limits of human decisioning, but also limits of machine decisioning. One is the Rubin causal model. It's a phrase coined by Donald Rubin, who is an economist / statistician. But basically, it's this conundrum, this fundamental problem of causal inference. Right? Marketing is a causal language. Most other fields are causal language. Think about diagnosis. If you do cancer diagnosis really well, that's great, but nobody cares because you care about the treatment. If you do LTV prediction really well, that's great, but nobody cares because you care about maximizing this thing, not static predictions. So all of these fields are essentially dependent on causal thinking. And the way that Rubin defined causality is very simple. Causality is the difference between the outcome under treatment for any given person minus the outcome under no treatment for any given person. And fundamental problem because it's unobservable. But that is the way that we have to think if we want to make progress in these fields. So that's one. And then the other person I named, Danny Kahneman and all the school of behavioral economists who put a big question mark on this ridiculous assumption of early economic theory, which was the rational voter, the rational individual, humans as entities that make rational decisions. What Kahneman, I think, very successfully showed, and he's a Nobel laureate, of course, and the first, I think, basically the father of behavioral economics, was that human decisioning is most of the times awful. And human decisioning is awful not because necessarily there is bias, even though there is, but I think his big contribution is to show that bias is just one factor in the weakness of human decisioning. The other one is noise. And we talked about this too. When you have had a bad breakfast, you make a bad hiring decision. If I'm in a bad mood, I don't play as nicely with my girls. Makes no sense. It's not bias, it's noise. It's just circumstantial. It's idiosyncratic. So where does that leave me? It leads me to say that I do want the future of machine decisioning, certainly in marketing, certainly in sentencing, certainly in diagnosis and treatment. But the big question is, how does the human in the loop get positioned? And how do we avoid a world in which we turn the entire decisioning process over to a black box that we call agentic AI? And I think that future would be a disaster.
Tobi, last question. So you're getting on a plane, you're sitting next to a young entrepreneur who's built the next big thing. They're jazzed about it, they can't wait to show it off to the world, and can't wait to show it off to you right there on the plane. What advice do you give that person, having gone down this road a bit?
Think more, do less. I think we're in this world of entrepreneurship where we have this bug in our ear that thanks to Cursor and the emergence of agentic AI for coding, we can build prototypes now more quickly than ever, and we can build product quicker than ever. But I think what gets swept aside a little bit is critical thinking, which I do. Look, I sound pessimistic, but at the end of the day, I think I'm an optimist when it comes to the eternal questions and the big questions. I do think that if you want to build a successful product and hopefully have some aspiration to make the world a better place and not just make money, you have to think about where you're going. And I think the difficulty and the problem of the fast emergence of these tools is that it's very easy to sweep aside these elements of critical thinking, sweep aside these larger ambitions, and just build something for the purpose of building something. So my advice would be slow down, take a breather, think, and then you can get back to building.
I think that's absolutely fantastic advice, Tobi. But I appreciate you being on the show today and telling the creation story of Growthloop.
Thank you for having me.
And this concludes another chapter of Code Story. Code Story is hosted and produced by Noah Labhart. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the podcasting app of your choice. And when you get a chance, leave us a review. Both things help us out tremendously. And thanks again for listening.
If you're a podcast host, listen up, this one's for you. My name is Allie Jackson. I'm the host of Finding Mr. Height, a dating and relationship podcast that I've been doing for 4 years now, sharing my positive and practical approach to dating that's built on my own life experience. And I wanted to share another experience that I've had, my secret behind monetizing my show. It's called Red Circle, and I was just telling my colleague about how much I love their platform. With Red Circle, not only am I getting a seamless hosting experience, but I also love the support I receive in ad sales. It's not just typical ad sales either. It's targeted opportunities based on my show and my life. And the platform is super simple. You just set your preferences and Red Circle matches you with sponsors that align with your show. You can vet every opportunity and their platform gives you great analytics. More recently too, my Red Circle team has brought me opportunities outside of my podcast on social media to really augment the podcast partnerships, bring them full circle. I just can't recommend them enough. If you want to give it a try, go to redcircle.com to get your free trial. That's redcircle.com for a free trial.
Capital One's tech team isn't just talking about multi-agentic AI. They already deployed one. It's called Chat Concierge, and it's simplifying car shopping. Using self-reflection and layered reasoning with live API checks, it doesn't just help buyers find a car they love, it helps schedule a test drive, get pre-approved for financing, and estimate trade-in value. Advanced, intuitive, and deployed. That's how they stack. That's technology at Capital One.
If you're a podcast host, listen up, this one's for you. My name is Allie Jackson. I'm the host of Finding Mr. Height, a dating and relationship podcast that I've been doing for 4 years now, sharing my positive and practical approach to dating that's built on my own life experience. And I wanted to share another experience that I've had, my secret behind monetizing my show. It's called Red Circle, and I was just telling my colleague about how much I love their platform. With Red Circle, not only am I getting a seamless hosting experience, but I also love the support I receive in ad sales. It's not just typical ad sales either. It's targeted opportunities based on my show and my life. And the platform is super simple. You just set your preferences and Red Circle matches you with sponsors that align with your show. You can vet every opportunity and their platform gives you great analytics. More recently too, my Red Circle team has brought me opportunities outside of my podcast on social media to really augment the podcast partnerships, bring them full circle. I just can't recommend them enough. If you want to give it a try, go to redcircle.com to get your free trial. That's redcircle.com for a free trial.